Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Devar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. This is Demai chapter 5, Halacha 8 in the Art Scroll 49a, and this is part 2 of the shiur. Today, we're really going to be covering the position of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai on land ownership and with the produce and the grain that comes from the ground in Eretz Yisrael, grown from a non-Jew. This is going to be told through the perspective of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Now, we saw at the end of part 1 of the shiur that Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is talking about what happens when land is owned by a non-Jew in Eretz Yisrael. And Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is saying that if somebody buys produce that's detached from the ground, in other words, perhaps they're going to the threshing floor, it's already been harvested, it's already been cut, and he's going to buy the grain there from the non-Jew, we saw that you're still going to have to separate out Truma Gedola and Trumas Meiser, but that's going to be from rabbinic law, and that is the position of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, that a non-Jew can have ownership in the land, and the produce that they're going to grow on a Doraita level is not going to be Doraita tevel, but D'Rabbanan, you're still going to have to tithe it. And we see that because of that, you're still going to have to do the tithes, but you're still not going to be able to eat the tithes that you're taking out. And if you want to give it to the tribe of the Kohanim, you can, but you can also sell it to them. And the tribe of the Kohanim can take payment for it. And that's going to be because this is rabbinic law. That is fitting the position of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Now, yesterday we covered the position of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says that, no, this would be Doraita tevel. And if you bought this detached produce, because a non-Jew can not only not own land in Eretz Yisrael, it doesn't do anything, but also the produce that they grow would still have sanctity. Now, everybody agrees that a non-Jew does not separate tithes. Everybody agrees about that. That's going to be one of those laws that the Torah says, where it says in the Torah, speak to the children of Israel, and then it tells them about the separation of tithes. And everywhere in the Torah it talks about speak to the children of Israel, it means it is a law just for Jews, and separating out tithes is something just for Jews. If a non-Jew separates out tithes, he didn't do anything. There's nothing halachic about it. So, in terms of with Rabbi Meir's position, Rabbi Meir would be saying that it would be subject to tithes doraita, and that you would have to give it to the tribe of the Kohanim, you couldn't sell it. There's going to come up later on a disagreement between Rabbi Hoshaya and Rabbi Yochanan as to the exact position of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. But in these kinds of disagreements, the position is going to go with Rabbi Yochanan. The position is about the exactitude of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, whether the tithing that comes after is going to be D'Rabbanan or not. So Rabbi Hoshaya says that this would be where you don't have to tithe it D'Rabbanan, according to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Rabbi Yochanan says you do. And Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is reflecting the opinion of his teacher, who is going to be Rabbi Yochanan. So we were talking about this law about someone who's going to buy harvested produce, and Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is now going to talk about buying produce that's still attached to the ground. In other words, you're driving along and you see a grain field, and the grain has not been picked yet, it's not been harvested. What can you do? Let's say you want to buy it, and it happens to be owned by a non-Jew in Eretz Yisrael. You can buy the grain, you can buy the harvest, and people can do that, right? You can buy a farmer's future harvest. And I believe that they're called futures, so that you're saying that, I'll buy from you, like at a small discount, and I'll buy all of it when it gets harvested, and that way the seller knows that he has a buyer, and that the buyer actually takes possession of it because he needs it for some reason. So this is what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about somebody who's going to buy attached produce from a non-Jew. And I want to point out where this is going. The rabbis, says Zamara Fuller, are basically going to be saying that after the Jew buys the produce, is it going to be where tithing now becomes possible? And why is that going to be? Because the rabbis are regarding the attached produce as though it grew in the Jew's field. And because of that, it's going to be rabbinically subject to the complete tithing obligation. So the Gemara says if somebody bought attached produce from a non-Jew, he must separate out Truma Gedola and Trumas Meiser according to rabbinic law, as in the last case, by the way. And here, he gives them to the tribe of the Kohanim, and he does not take any payment from the tribe of the Kohanim. And that's going to be the difference between here and there. Over there, he can sell it to the tribe of the Kohanim. Over here, he has to give it. And the idea is that in Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi's first case, he's buying detached produce from a non-Jew. And that's going to have a limited obligation from what the rabbis impose. And basically, they're going to require him to separate out the tithes, but not to give it away for free. But in the second case, where you're buying attached produce, the rabbis are also requiring him to give away the tithes. And basically, the attached produce is going to be treated more stringently because it's going to be like it actually grew in a Jew's field. And that's why it's going to be where you don't sell it, you're going to actually give it away. And the Gemara asks, what is the reason? And the Gemara is going to go on a tangent, and it's going to it's not going to answer the question right now. It's going to go on an unrelated exposition, and it's going to say that the following verse, which addresses the Levim, which states, when you accept Meiser Rishon from the children of Israel, and this, by the way, is quoting in Vayikra 18:26, and that's where the verse is stating that a Levi who receives Meiser Rishon from Israel must separate out a tenth and give it to a Kohen as Trumas Meiser. Now, again, it's specifying the children of Israel. And the Gemara is trying to teach that when it's specifying the children of Israel, that the Gemara says only from produce received from the children of Israel. That's going to be the Yisraelim. And from them may you take Meiser Rishon and other tithes. And the Gemara says, but you may not take them from the hands of the Kohanim and the Levim. And the Mara Fulda explains that Kohanim and Levim are obligated to tithe their own produce, but they don't need to give away the tithes. Why would a Kohen want to separate and have to separate out Truma Meiser, even though he's going to keep it? Because maybe he wants to go sell the Hulin. And if he has a pile that's intermixed, then you made a problem for whoever's buying it. So even the Kohen or the Levi has to separate out the tithes and has to do it in order and has to take out the proper amount. And that's a requirement even for them to tithe, even if they're going to be keeping it. Now, a Levi certainly has to separate out part of the tithes because the Truma Meiser goes to the tribe of the Kohanim. That goes to the Kohen. So the Gemara now is going to move on, and it's going to use this verse that we just mentioned in Vayikra 18:26, where it's saying the verse that states a Levi who receives Meiser Rishon from Israel must separate out a tenth and give it to the Kohen as Trumas Meiser. And it says that it's going to be getting into why someone who's buying detached produce from a non-Jew does not need to give the tithe away for free. And the Gemara says that the previous explanation resembles that which Rabbi Lazar said. And the verse states, when you accept Meiser Rishon from the children of Israel. That's what Vayikra says. And it says, by specifying the children of Israel, the Torah teaches that only from the produce received from the children of Israel, that's going to be Jews, may you take Meiser Rishon and other tithes, but you may not take them from the hands of a non-Jew. In other words, from produce that grew in the ownership of a non-Jew. Also, what this is pointing out is that a non-Jew does not need to separate out tithes from produce that comes and grows in the land. That's done by Jews. Now, the rabbis are deciding about a leniency here. And, at this point, somebody is rabbinically obligated to separate out tithes from the non-Jew's produce, but he doesn't need to give it away for free. And this is really being used as an asmata, in other words, biblical support for putting a fence in for rabbinic law. Why? Because the ruling it conveys is just a leniency in a rabbinic decree. And we saw in the Masechet in Berachot that where they put up in Berachot Yerushalmi, where they're putting up an asmata and they have a rabbinic thing, if you put it together with a verse, it makes it stronger. And it reinforces it. So the rabbis are deciding that this leniency only applies to someone who's buying the produce after it's been harvested. But if it's still attached to the ground at the time of the purchase, the buyer must indeed give the tithes to the Goan and the Levi, and he has no right to demand compensation. Now, you can see more about a similar sugya, by the way, in Bechorot, in 11b, in the Bavli. So, there's another incident that comes up that is going to be similar. And the Gemara says, Rabbi Acha says, in the days of Rabbi Hoshaya, they wanted to vote regarding produce grown by non-Jews in Har HaMelech, that's going to be the Temple Mount, to exempt it from tithes. Now, this is a day where you used to have the area under control of Jews. Now it's going to be under the control of non-Jews at the time of Rabbi Hoshaya. And the Gemara is trying to underscore the horrible loss that the Jewish people had in Eretz Yisrael and the destruction of Jewish life. And there really, in times of Rabbi Hoshaya, there's really not any Jews that are living there in that particular area. You can see more about this in the Yerushalmi and Tanis 4:5. If you really kind of want to see the amount of destruction that happened, Yerushalmi Tanis 4:5 is a very heart-wrenching set of sugyas, and that's actually what I try to read on Tisha B'Av. But anyway, they wanted to exempt the produce of that area from tithing because Rabbi Hoshaya is agreeing with Rabbi Shimon's opinion that a non-Jew can have ownership of the land to exempt it from tithing. And Rabbi Hoshaya is holding that, according to Rabbi Shimon, there's not even a rabbinic requirement to tithe. So, in this respect, Rabbi Hoshaya disagrees with Rabbi Yochanan. And in where they're trying to set up this ruling, they're trying to set it up, but this committee and Bet Din either dispersed or Rabbi Hoshaya died, says Amara Fulda, right before they could rule on it. So the Gemara says that they said, let Rabbi Hoshaya come and decide the law. However, Rabbi Hoshaya did not come until the opportunity was lost. And again, maybe they either disbanded or he passed away before it happened. And the Gemara is going to give another ruling on this matter. Rabbi Yudah Bar Pazi says in the name of Rabbi Hoshaya, the halacha accords with Rabbi Shimon, who holds that a non-Jew can own land to exempt it from the produce from the tithing obligation. Now, the Gemara is going to ask why Rabbi Hoshaya has to say this. And the Gemara says that if not for this statement made by Rabbi Hoshaya, what would he have said? What would he have said? And so the Gemara is going to point it out. It's going to say, in disputes between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon, does the halacha not always follow Rabbi Shimon? And basically, according to the logic of the Yerushalmi, it always does. And therefore, it's unnecessary for Rabbi Hoshaya here to say that the halacha does follow Rabbi Shimon. There are other places that actually state that in a dispute between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon, the halacha is going to accord with Rabbi Shimon. That, by the way, is in Masechet Trumos, where Rabbi Yochanan gives out a list of, in a dispute between this Tana and that Tana, here's how the halacha goes. And in the dispute over there between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon, the halacha is going to go by Rabbi Shimon. You can see that in Trumos 3:1. But in the Bavli Erevin 46b, it has a doubt as to who the halacha is going to follow in a disagreement between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon. The commentators over there are going to discuss whether in this instance the Yerushalmi's position is going to be accepted. And the Bavli does not disagree outright, but it's a little bit unclear. Over here, it's much more clear in the order of the Yerushalmi. In the order of the Yerushalmi, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon, it's always going to follow Rabbi Shimon between those two. So it seems unnecessary that Rabbi Hoshaya should have to say that the halacha would go by Rabbi Shimon. Now, that is going to be a big hiddush here, and we're going to try to see why is Rabbi Hoshaya's ruling here even brought. Why is it even necessary? Because, right in the beginning of the sugya, in the first part of this year, we see a disagreement between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon. And in the logic of the Yerushalmi, Rabbi Shimon is always going to be the halacha over Rabbi Meir. So why do you need to do that? And by the way, you have 2 versus 1, 2 Tanaim versus 1 Tana. You have Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon versus Rabbi Meir. So even that is going to make where it's definitely going to be like Rabbi Shimon. So what is Rabbi Hoshaya trying to say over here? He's trying to say something else. The Gemara says, it was because of the Baraisa that teaches Rabbi Shimon Shizuri says there was an incident where tevel produce becomes mixed with chulin produce, and it says that I asked Rabbi Tarfon what to do. And he said to me, go buy produce from a non-Jew and tithe it from what you buy for the tevel. In other words, he's saying that go buy from the non-Jew, and you have a pile that got mixed with your chulin and tevel, and basically Rabbi Tarfon is saying with the produce that you bought from a non-Jew, that's going to be biblical tevel. It's going to be deraita tevel, and you would not be able to rectify biblical tevel of a Jew. So effectively, what this is trying to say is that Rabbi Tarfon is holding that a non-Jew does not have ownership of the land to exempt it from the tithing. And that, by the way, looks like Rabbi Meir's position. But wait a second. If you have 2 Tanaim and 2 Tanaim, you might have a problem, because if you have Rabbi Tarfon and you have Rabbi Meir, and over here you have Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, well, there's not a majority. So that looks like a big problem. Now, is Rabbi Tarfon suggesting that Rabbi Shimon ben Zuri buy the produce of a Jew? And apparently the produce of a Jew is going to be less likely to be tevel than produce of a non-Jew. So the idea here is that he's saying, no, go buy it from the market. And when he's saying to buy it from the market, so there's a difference between the Tosefta. In the Tosefta, it says buy it from the market. And over here, it's saying buy it from the non-Jew. Now, there's a difference. Now, when you're saying go buy it from the market, that would be where you're assuming that the majority of the sellers are Jews. And so you'd be assuming that, perhaps the Jew is going to be tithing it. And that's going to be much less likely to be tevel than from a non-Jew. So what's going on over here? And the Gemara is going to continue. It's going to say, in regard to this ruling, a Baraisa teaches that 2 Tanaim disagree with it. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon say a non-Jew does have ownership of land in Eretz Yisrael to exempt it from tithing. So it looks like there's a dispute between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Tarfon versus Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. And basically says the Rosh Cirilio that Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon would rule here that's forbidden to tithe the mixed tevel with produce from a non-Jew. Why? Because the non-Jew's produce is exempt from tithing. And Shimon Shazuri would have to go find a Jew who had definite tevel and buy it from him. In other words, when the Tosefta is saying go to the market to buy it from a Jew, he's talking about what we just covered in chapter 5, Halacha 7, which is going to be the tevel seller. And you had a case where you had a definite tevel seller who would be a Jew, who would go and sell the tevel so that you could go fix your pile. So in the version of the Tosefta over there, Rabbi Tarfon is saying, go to the Jew who's the tevel seller, go buy the tevel from him, and fix your pile that way. In this version of the Yerushalmi, it's saying, go buy it from a non-Jew. And that would look like it's following the position of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir would basically be saying that, hey, the non-Jew can't have ownership of the land. Whatever grows out of the land of Eretz Yisrael has Kedusha, and so it's definite tevel. And so you can use the definite tevel from a non-Jew to tithe and to fix your hulin pile. And your pile the meduma that gets mixed up between the hulin and the tevel to invalidate your pile. You have a big problem when you have these piles that get mixed up because you can't use them without fixing them. That's why you need to know Jewish law so that you can fix your property. You can't just go use it because you'll have tevel mixed into it, and unfortunately people can incur death from heaven. And there's Gemaras that talk about how people can die early, or God forbid their children can die early. It's terrible. So we don't want that, and that's why we want to learn how it works. Now, the Gemara here is implying that it's like Rabbi Meir. The Tosefta parallel here, it looks like Rabbi Tarfon is saying go to the tevel seller, get the tevel from the Jew, and fix your pile that way. Now, the Gemara is going to say that in order that you should not think to say that there are two Tanaim, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Tarfon, who hold that a non-Jew does not have ownership, versus the other two Tanaim, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, who hold that a non-Jew does have ownership, and thus the halacha would not be clear. Rabbi Hoshaya, in the sugya that we were just talking about, has to say the halacha accords with Rabbi Shimon. Why? Because you have this Gemara out there that is saying that, Rabbi Tarfon is sitting there saying to buy the produce from a non-Jew and tithe it. And it looks like that would make it 2 versus 2. And in the case of 2 versus 2, it's unclear what the halacha would be. We don't work that way. Over here, he's really bringing out this ruling to say, no, it goes with Rabbi Shimon, and it's 2 versus 1. And that's why he's putting it out there. Now, why is the Gemara saying this, where it's saying, buy the produce from a non-Jew and tithe it? And this is going to be the big question. Perhaps it's a scribal error, or I don't know. Sometimes these things happen in the Yerushalmi, and actually the Vilna Goan goes back and he makes a lot of corrections, and this might be something that he may have actually redacted and modified a little bit. But sometimes you have things that might be a scribal error, because how can you have it where there's 2 versus 2? And that would be a big question. But anyway, what this is doing is this is highlighting the position of Rabbi Shimon, that the halacha is going to be like Rabbi Shimon, and in the disagreement between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon, the halacha is like Rabbi Shimon. Now, we were quoting Rabbi Hoshaya's statement that the halacha is going to follow Rabbi Shimon, and it's going to give another proof that the halacha is in fact going to follow Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Shimon's position. So the Gemara says, and there's another proof that emerges from the following discussion based on the incident that Rabbi Zera related, where it says, Abba Anatoli brought produce from an Aramean, and he came before Rabbi Yudah ben Levi to ask whether he had to tithe it. And Rabbi Yudah ben Levi sent the produce to his son Menachem to rectify it. In other words, Menachem went to go rectify the produce, and he gave the tithes to Rabbi Yudah ben Levi. In other words, his father accepted the tithes. And we see here ben Levi, which means that he's a Levi. So Rabbi Yudah ben Levi evidently agrees with Rabbi Meir's view that a non-Jew looks like does not have ownership of the land to exempt its produce from tithing, and therefore the Jewish buyer of the produce, Abba Anatoli, was obligated to give the tithes away without receiving compensation. And I just want to explain this with the Vilna Goan's commentary. Vilna Goan says that the case must have been where Rabbi Yudah ben Levi did not pay because the incident would not teach any novel point, and Rabbi Zera would have no need to report it. And produce grown on land owned by a non-Jew must certainly be tithed either biblically or rabbinically. That, by the way, is the malokit that we're talking about. In any case, it has to be tithed. The only question is going to be whether a recipient has to pay for it or not. Can he get it without paying it, or does he have to pay for it? So it was taught before that according to Rabbi Shimon, somebody who's going to buy detached produce that grew on the land of a non-Jew is rabbinically obligated to have tithes taken in it. But he does not need to give them away, although he must give the Truma Gadol and Trumas Meiser to a Kohen because he's not allowed to consume it. However, he can demand payment because it's d'Rabbanan. It's not d'Oraita, but it's d'Rabbanan. So when it's d'Oraita, he has to give it away. And when it's d'Rabbanan, he can give it away, but he can also sell it if he chooses to. Now, the incident here with Rabbi Yudah ben Levi is where he's taking tithes without paying. And that looks like he's subscribing to the view that a non-Jew cannot own land in Eretz Yisrael to exempt the produce from tithing. And the Jewish buyer is thus biblically obligated to give the tithes to the proper recipients, and he obviously cannot demand compensation. So that, again, is going to be a case where it was attached to the ground, and maybe he purchased the grain from the non-Jew, and then since it was attached to the ground, he's going to have to give the tithes, and he has to give it and not sell it. In the other case where he's buying detached produce, he would be able to do it without paying for it. So in the case coming up, the question is going to deepen a little bit, and there's going to be some nuance to it. So the Gemara is going to continue, and it's going to say when Menachem came back, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi met him, and he said to him approvingly, "Who would do this other than your father?" In other words, like Rabbi Yudah ben Levi, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi also accepts Rabbi Meir's position that a non-Jew cannot own land to exempt the produce from tithing it. So basically it looks like Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is giving praise to Rabbi Yudah ben Levi that he acted correctly. Now, the Gemara is going to develop the proof by noting a contradiction that we saw between an earlier ruling with Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. And the Gemara says that the view of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is reversed from what he said before about, and it's going to say it right here. It's going to say there that we just, what we're starting with the shear. It says one who buys detached produce from a non-Jew, he must separate out Truma Gadola and Trumas Meiser according to rabbinic law. and he gives them to the tribe of the Kohanim, and he receives payment from the tribe. In other words, the Kohanim who are going to collect it can pay it. By the way, he can always give it to the tribe, but he doesn't have to give it to the tribe. Now, the point over there is that he can sell it. Now, that really is that this is going to be obligated to Rabbanan for the detached produce. But here's where it gets interesting. The Gemara continues, says, but here he says this. In other words, he's effectively approving Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi's acceptance of Abba Antoli's tithes for free. So the Gemara is going to try to solve this contradiction by asserting that in the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, who reported Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi's rulings earlier, the episode was different. So the difference is going to be like this. The Gemara says, Rabbi Abba bar Zemina says before Rabbi Zera, Rabbi Shimon did not say that he did not report the incident as above. Rather, according to Rabbi Shimon, by the way, this is not Shimon bar Yochai, this is Rabbi Shimon, who is the Amorah. So, according to Rabbi Shimon, when Menachem came back and Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi met him, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said to him disapprovingly, these are not your father's. In other words, that your father was not entitled to keep the tithes without paying for them. Why? Because a non-Jew's ownership of land does exempt the produce from tithing. In other words, that this is, trying to show that, that this person became upset, and that, it looks like, he did something wrong. And in other words, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi was upset. That's what the Gemara says. And it looks like that he took the tithes without paying for it. What's going on here? So according to this other version of the story, the rulings of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi seem inconsistent because both are based on Rabbi Shimon's view, Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai's view, that a non-Jew can own land in Eretz Yisrael to exempt the produce from tithing. That, by the way, would be another proof that the halacha accords with Rabbi Shimon. Now, the Vilna Goan is saying that over here that that it could be where somebody was purchasing produce that grew outside of Eretz Yisrael, and in a country like Syria, where the rabbis are requiring a separation of tithes, d'Rabbanan. So it could be that there's actually two different incidences where this happened, according to what the Vilna Goan is saying, that one happened with Eretz Yisrael, and that would be like Rabbi Shimon, and the other case over here, where he's taking the tithes without paying for them, that could be where perhaps that's going to be in the land, and perhaps this was produce that was attached, and over there where he's taking the where he shouldn't have been taking the tithes, it could be where without payment. In other words, one case could be where it was either attached to the ground, so he should have been getting it for free, and in the other case, he shouldn't have been taking it for free because he was doing a service. The son was doing a service for him, and they should have paid for it. And either the produce came from a place like Syria, or the produce came from Eretz Yisrael, but it was detached produce. But in either case, if it was going to be either attached or detached, this opinion goes by Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. Now, if this were attached or detached, Rabbi Meir would basically say that the tithes, always have kedusha, and that you always have to give the tithes. And there's never a case where you're going to be selling the tithes from what grew in that case. So I hope that clears it up, and we're going to be finishing up the Gemara on part 3 of the shiur. Have a great day.